computer. Lovely. Thank you.
How true. Okay.
Yes. Right. Okay. Now the final thing we need to do is throw something on the floor and try the PowerPoint malarkey. Right. It's always good when the technical part works, and then you've got a fighting chance of the rest of the evening being all right. Okay, thanks very much for inviting me along. As we said, I actually managed to not book this in my diary, so it was a bit of a shock that at 5 o'clock this morning I started reading my email and thought, I've got to do a talk this evening, so that should be. I'm not hugely prepared, but there we go. Tonight I want to start off with the story behind a picture, and it's the story behind this picture, which is the much under-photographed pier at Southwold. And you know, the world needs a few more pictures of the pier at Southwold. And in order to get this picture, I'd agreed to meet my friend Chris at Southwold for dawn. And there was a couple of issues with this. One is that Southwold is quite a drive for me. It's about an hour and 3/4 drive. And also, this was dawn in May. And for those of you who aren't landscape photographers, dawn in May is, oh my God, early. In fact, this was taken at 3:45 in the morning. But I thought it's got to be worth it because there's always something to take pictures of at Southwold. So I packed my gear the night before, chucked it in, got it all ready, went to bed about 10 o'clock. My alarm went off at 1:30, 3.5 hours sleep, not hugely recommended, but I throw my gear in the car and I head off up the A12. And we're going along, and it's me with the sat nav and the late night DJ for company. When suddenly, about halfway up the A12, suddenly they put up a sign saying road closed. And at that time of night, they don't bother creating a diversion. Oh no, they just chuck you off the motorway and let you sort it out for yourself. So I ended up somewhere near Clacton, going round and round and round in circles till I built up enough speed to fly off in the right direction. Eventually I got back on the A12 somewhere near Ipswich, and I'm going along. And I thought it's turning into a bit of a nightmare journey, but it's going to be worth it. There's always something to take pictures of at Southwold. Well, without further ado, I get to Southwold, I set my tripod up, I get my gear ready, and I take this picture. And this isn't using any of the 10 stoppers, filters, or anything like that for this long exposure. It's a long exposure because it was still dark. Yeah, it was well before dawn. Anyway, I'm there. And about 20 minutes later, my friend Chris turns up. Chris has had a considerably easier journey than I've had, mainly due to the fact that he lives in Southwold. And Chris turns up, sets his tripod up, leaves his camera in his bag, leans on his tripod and starts chatting. And we haven't seen each other for a good year and a half. So we're talking away and putting the world to right. And I turn to the left and I take this picture of the much under-photographed beach huts at Southwold. And we're talking away, and I decide to move under the pier. So I take a shot under the pier, and then we move to the right of the pier. And it's about this time the sun's starting to come up, and I'm taking shot after shot. Chris all the time is just leaning on his tripod, camera in his bag, chatting away. And as the sun comes up, I'm still taking loads of shots. And about this point, I've taken at least 600 or 700 shots at least. Chris hasn't taken any. He hasn't even got his camera out of his bag. That's a bit strange. Nah, who knows? Anyway, sun comes up, no more decent light. So we decide to head off down to the harbour. And when we wander around the harbour, I take some sort of fairly predictable pictures of the ferry and some of the sort of pictures that non-photographers hate and photographers love, of dereliction and stuff like that. And all the time, Chris is wandering around behind me chatting, but not got his camera out. And eventually I turned around to him and I said to him, I said, Chris, I can't help noticing that you've got up at stupid o'clock in the morning and yet you haven't taken your camera out of your bag. You haven't taken any pictures. He said, well, there's not much to take any pictures of at Southwold, is there? And I think what Chris was suffering from was a thing that I like to call locational myopia. I think a lot of photographers suffer from this need to sort of look further afield than what's right on their doorstep. You know, we kind of miss the stuff that's close to us. And so that's my theme for tonight, really, is this idea of looking at the stuff that's right on your doorstep rather than, because as photographers, we're constantly wishing we were somewhere else. You know, landscape photographers constantly want to be in the Lake District or the wilds of Highlands of Scotland. Or nature photographers, you know, they always want to be on the Serengeti instead of down their local nature reserve. You know, it's really easy to constantly look further afield and wish you were somewhere else. But, you know, I'm going to try and talk about making the best of what's on my doorstep. I'm going to talk a bit about my journey as a photographer. Basically, the format for tonight is I'm going to start really close to my house and slowly spiral out further and further. So if I start showing you pictures of New Zealand, it probably means I've buggered up my timing again. Right, so here's a few things about me. Nothing hugely exciting there, I suppose. Apart from that, if anybody, we got any members of ePhotozine? Anybody? Hands up? No? Okay.
Yes, I saw a hand go up. I think it was Eddie.
I can't see all the hands, so yeah, thanks. Hopefully we haven't got anybody who's been thrown off the site by the moderators, because that makes for a really tedious tea break, to be honest. So I am a member of, for want of a better term, a few photographers' collectives. The Painting with Light Society, this is a group of landscape photographers from across East Anglia. And we've all been highly commended in Landscape Photographer of the Year. But you've also got people in it like John Gibbs, who was the very first Landscape Photographer of the Year. Kate Barclay has been highly commended and on the top of the front cover of the book. Who else we got? Chris Herring, he's a professional landscape photographer. And so I like that group because it gives me a chance to hang around with some really, really excellent photographers. There's been a couple of spin-offs from that. One of which is Images of Essex. There's three of us in Images of Essex. There's myself, who lives down in the bottom left-hand corner of Essex, near Epping Forest. Kevin Goodchild, who lives down the bottom right-hand corner, down near Southend. And Dave Peck, who lives up near Colchester. So between the three of us, we can kind of cover any requirements for shots of Essex. Also, I was asked to join Images of Suffolk. I've not got that many images of Suffolk. You've probably seen all of them already tonight, but still, it was nice of the guys to invite me along to to add a few pictures to that collection. And then a few commercial things. Probably the most interesting one of those is Art Vogue. So this is a commercial agency, and they sell into the commercial market. And the commercial market would be things like a series of pictures for a residential complex or a hotel or a restaurant, stuff like that. And sometimes, you know, they can do pictures that are absolutely huge, finals of 10 foot by 20 foot, something like that. Or they can just be a series of framed pictures. I mean, it sounds really cool having your own agent. But Danny was my agent there. He phoned me up one day and he said to me, he said, Chris, he said, what we need is more of your black and white London abstracts. I said, sure, I can do that. He said, yeah, he said, that's the sort of thing we can sell. He said, it's exactly the sort of thing we want. I said, great, I'll do you a load more. He said, yeah, it's exactly the sort of nondescript thing we need. That's your agent, really. I don't know what to say about that, to be honest. But it's quite strange. It's a different market because they're after stuff that's arty enough to be interesting, but not so arty it upsets people. So it's kind of a different one. And as alluded to, I'm also a member of, I was chairman, I forget this, chairman of the H2 Photographic Society, which is was Harlow Photographic Society. We couldn't afford to stay in Harlow, so we had to move to a little place called Much Haddam. So we're now Harlow and Haddam H2 Photographic Society. So there may be some judge abuse tonight. Sorry about that, but we've all been there, so hopefully you'll appreciate that.
We do have one or two judges on the Zoom, so yeah.
Yeah, luckily none of them have ever judged me, so they know it's not about them.
True.
These are the magazines I've been published in. Possibly the most interesting one of those is BBC Countryfile magazine, and this came through Images of Essex. And Tor, is the editor there, she contacted us and said, we've got doing a feature on Essex. She said, she sent me this long list of places, and she said, you got 3 weeks. Can you shoot all of those in 3 weeks? I said, yeah, it shouldn't be a problem. And this was like end of January, beginning of February. And she said, there is one thing. This is for the spring issue. Can you make them look a bit like spring? So we had a bit of a discussion, and we decided the best way to do this was to, as you drive to somewhere, grab a bunch of daffodils from the local garage and stick them in the foreground of each shot. Right, so my journey as a photographer starts with this tree, which is my favourite tree. It's not very far from me. It's down the end of my road, a little place called Rolling Valley Meadows. And I went down there one morning and I took this shot with a little point and shoot camera. And I thought to myself, do you know what? That's not bad. Let's give landscape photography a go. I mean, how hard can it be? So not one to do things by halves. I decided I was going to put on an exhibition. I've only got one picture, but I've decided I'm going to put on an exhibition. And so I popped down to Loughton Library and I look at the exhibition space, and it's a big exhibition space. You need sort of 60 to 80 pictures really to fill it. And I book an exhibition space for 16, 17 months time. And they asked me what the name of my exhibition was. So a little tip for you, if you ever book an exhibition and somebody asks you what the name of it is, go for something like Life Behind the Lens, My View, Colours in the Landscape, something so vague that means you can stick any old picture in it. Yeah. Don't go for what I did, which was, it's going to be a year in the life of Rolling Valley Meadows Nature Reserve. Because I've not only limited myself to a specific place, I've limited myself to a specific year. But what did I know? So it seemed like a good idea at the time. So what happened with the exhibition? Well, start of the year, luckily, it snowed. And snow always makes things a little bit more interesting. I love it when Zoom goes really, really slow. Thank you. You know, even sort of rusting farm machinery can look a bit more interesting with a bit of snow on it. But you soon discover, as you start doing landscape photography for real, that landscape photography is kind of the constant search for foreground interest. And you're always looking for something. And Rolling Valley Meadows Nature Reserve is not huge. It's half a dozen fields with a river running through it. It's not, we're not talking the Serengeti, we're not talking the Lake District. This is just kind of a really sort of just a few fields really. So you're desperately looking for foreground interest. So these gates become the main foreground interest and appear in just about most of the shots where I'm doing a landscape, because you've got to put something in your shots. As the year progresses, I start playing with other ideas. So maybe get down to do some macro shots of some fungi, or instead of just taking a standard flower picture, why not lay down on the floor and shoot upwards, see what you get. And I'm shooting pretty much every weekend and every evening during the summer. Obviously can't shoot evenings during the winter because it's dark. But I am learning as I go. And I'm learning fast and I'm learning a lot. So, for instance, this picture is the one where I sort of credit myself as the first time I ever really grasped the power of a crop and framing, because this looks like quite a rural, bucolic scene, doesn't it? Quite sort of looks like you're in the middle of nowhere. Well, just about there is a massive great tower block. Yeah, but just cropping it out just makes the scene look completely different. I started playing with shadows and light. This is called One Man and His Dog. That's a camera in one hand, dog biscuit in the other hand. It's the only way to do it. So decided to call this one Moth Eaten. It's not till you put, it's between you and me, it's not till you put a talk together you realise just how awful your titles are. I was doing this talk once physically in a camera club, and I read out a title, and somebody in the front row just stuck their head in their hands and said, "Oh my God." So I won't be upset if you've grown at any of the titles, to be honest. As the year progresses, I'm trying lots of different stuff. Trying to do some nature photography, and this one, if it ever appears, yeah, thank you. This one, I decided to call this one a full start, because it looks like number 3's got off the blocks while the rest are still there, got their head down waiting to go. And so, like anywhere, the nature reserve has its fair share of vandals. And I came across this motorbike had been set light, and there was a kid standing next to it. And the first thing he said to me was, "Weren't me, mister, weren't me, honest." And I was like, "I don't care. I've just got another picture to fill up my exhibition. So, go and set light to another one." Decided to call this one A Seat in the Country. Worth a groan, isn't it, if anybody's made it?
Yeah. Well,
if you shoot anywhere for long enough, you'll get a rainbow. And of course, in this country, you certainly will get rain. And so this Zoom does this shot a favor, because what you can't really see is the sheer quantity of noise that's over in these dark areas. But this is like very early digital. So, it was probably the best we could do at the time. You couldn't even begin to put that into competition now, because the judge just would have a fit with their leg up. So I'm learning as I'm going. I'm not only learning to take pictures, I'm learning how to post-process, and I'm learning how to use Photoshop. And it's being Photoshop. One of the first things we did at the time was learn how to pop colours. So this is a bit of colour popping on a mooring ring. So what's a mooring ring doing in the middle of Essex, or on the edge of Essex, edge of London, in the middle of a big plain of concrete? Well, it turns out that Roding Valley Meadows during the Second World War was RAF Chigwell. And what it was a barrage balloon site one side of the road and an ack gun site the other side of the road. And it was there to defend London from the Luftwaffe. And as you walk around the reserve, you can occasionally find these little parts of like runners for hangars and things like that. But for me, probably the real saving grace of the exhibition was the oxide daisies, because the oxide daisies, I just absolutely adore these things. I think they're just such beautiful little flowers, or big flowers, really. They're quite sort of brutish, to be honest. But they just got a certain beauty of them. I reckon a good 20-25% of the exhibition ended up being oxide daisies. I just absolutely love them. And you got, especially around this time, you can get sort of seeds of them. They're absolutely lovely. Like I say, I'm learning post-processing as I go. So in this case, what we got here is a triptych of grass drying to become hay. And I had to learn quite a bit with this, because first of all, I had to learn how to tone them and convert them to black and white. I then had to learn how to build up a triptych in Photoshop. And when I'd done all of that, I had to work out how on earth you spell triptych. If you're anything like me, you just throw letters at the spell checker until it just gives in. And And this is the final shot I got of the exhibition, this one here. And this kind of shows how far I came in that just over a year, it really was. So I've gone from standing up, hand holding a single 1 megapixel camera to a massive 3 megapixel camera, none of your rubbish, interpolated to 6. I've got it on a tripod. I've got coking filters on the front. I've got a remote release. I've got a spirit level on the top. All the things they tell you to do in the books, because I've got it wrong. I've read out why I got it wrong, and then I've gone and done it right. Because nobody ever learns from anybody else's mistakes. So why not get out there and make mistakes? So that was my principle. So the exhibition itself, well, it went well. I got lots of lovely comments, and to my surprise, I sold quite a few pictures because people were quite chuffed to see pictures of their local area or places they knew and were quite familiar with, presented to them in slightly different ways. Since the exhibition, I've got to say, I probably suffered quite a bit with locational myopia. Because, I mean, if you imagine, if you've walked into a field and you've taken, say, 4,000 or 5,000 pictures in that one field, it's quite hard to think of new ways to interpret it. But over the years, I've managed a few. I tell everybody these are 6-spot burnet moths. People don't argue, so we'll go with that, shall we? No counting, no counting. I saw what you were doing. This is called A Little Bit of Summer. And this is a dandelion up close and sort of exploding across the screen. So one of the things I wanted for the exhibition was the floods, because Rolling Valley Meadows Nature Reserve is some of the last remaining flood meadows in Essex. In fact, it's a triple SI because it's the last remaining unploughed flood meadows in Essex. And being flood meadows, it should flood unless you're doing an exhibition about it, in which case, obviously, it won't flood because that would be too helpful. But this gives you a kind of idea of what the floods are like. So this in the foreground here is the River Roding itself. And then in behind, the field behind us flooded, and it floods to a depth of just over the top of your wellies. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter how high your wellies are. It's just always just over the top of it. And this kind of gives you another view of that. And so what normally happens is that the river sort of meanders over here somewhere, just slowly meandering along. But in the winter, it will suddenly break its banks and come pouring straight through this gate. And it's pouring through an absolute rate of knots, because I was taking this and I had the camera on a tripod. And at one point, I couldn't decide whether the tripod was there to keep the camera up or keep me up, to be honest. The water was just pouring past my feet so fast. But eventually it stills, and it means that you can get out of a morning and get this sort of shot. See what I mean about the reserve? The only sort of foreground interest is this gate. And in order to get this shot, you have to walk out across that field, up to the tops of your wellies and stand there taking this shot in ice cold, freezing water. It's not the most unpleasant experience. In fact, you can even see the ice forming around the gate there. That's how cold it is. But, you know, still, you can get a shot as the sun comes up. And it's quite tricky to get this shot because, you know, normally when it rains, to get the floods, you need rain. And when it rains, you get sort of grey, flat, dull, and uninteresting skies. So I need a break in the clouds combined with a weekend, because I work during the week, so I don't have time to get over there in the mornings. But occasionally, every now and then, I'll get over there and grab a shot of this very same gate. So fog. Fog is a great time to revisit somewhere that you know. It gives you recession and depth and mystery to places that are otherwise quite mundane, but can just add something different to it. And so it's well worth visiting somewhere in the fog if you're photographing it, because it can look completely different. This one is a pattern I found in a frozen puddle. It's called the Jester. And this is kind of to give you an idea of what the reserve is actually like. Thank you. I'm standing here at the top of the reserve. I've got my back to the M11 motorway. Down in the middle here, we've got the river. And then my house is just about there. So it's right on the doorstep of my house. You know, I can see all of this from my bedroom window. This next shot is, it's a grab shot. It's a 7-shot HDR image. And I'll talk about HDR later, but it's really just a grab shot I got one morning as I was walking the dog. So it's always worth having a camera with you, just in case something interesting happens. And this next shot is the green lane through the middle of the reserve. The green lane is an old drover's road. You can tell it's a drover's road because either side of this is massive great ditches. They're far too deep to drain the track itself, but they're there to keep the stock on the road as it's pushed towards or driven towards Romford Market. So this shot was one of a series. So for a while, my website, Google image search, absolutely adored my website. I have no idea what I did to do it, because if I did, I would be a very rich man. But for a while, if you Googled snow images, this would come out about number 3, and another one of mine would come up about number 4. If you Googled black and white images, my images would come up as well. This got me a lot of work, but it also means that around about Christmas time, everybody thinks, oh, let's put a snowy background on our website. So they go to your website and they hot link straight to your image, which you soon discover that when you start looking at your logs, that you're actually sort of powering half the internet about in Christmas time, because everybody's nicked your picture for the background. So here we are. If it ever catches up, come on, there you go. Here we are back at my favorite tree, and this is a color image. It doesn't look color, I know, but it is actually color. There was just no color that day, really. But you start to wonder if you've actually learned anything over the 10 years since I took, come on, up here.
The first one. Yeah.
That one, the first one, thank you. God, something gone ever so laggy, sorry. You know, I've gone from that to this. And as far as I can work out, all I've worked out how to do in the last 10 years is to open the gate and turn the camera up the right way. So I'm not sure I've actually achieved very much. So this was like progress. This is one of a series of pictures that Essex Life magazine asked to use as part of their Christmas edition once, and it's kind of weird when you give pictures to a magazine. You're never quite sure what they're going to do to them. And they said, I came back to me and they said, this one, we want to use it for the cover. Can anybody spot what a problem is with using that as the cover of a magazine?
Where are you going to
put landscape?
Yes,
yeah.
Where to put all the text?
Yeah, text, and it's not portrait.
It's not portrait. Well, that was the main worry. I said it's not portrait. She said it's fine. She said, what I've done is I've put a new sky on it, and, I've grown some snow off the bottom. And actually, I think she's done a really nice job of it, because she's actually managed to keep the text off my picture, which is really quite pleasant. So I was quite chuffed with the way she did that. It was very, I mean, much better than, like, you see a lot of the photography magazines, they've got so much text on the front that you can't actually see what the original image is. So here's the same tree, this time from the other side. And somebody asked me in an exhibition, they said, how did you get through the gate without leaving any footprints? I said to them, well, what you've got to do is you have to wait. They said, how long do you have to wait? I said, about 3 years. So as you can tell, I kind of love snow. And back in 2009, 2nd of February, they announced, it was a Sunday, and they announced that there was going to be snow on the Monday morning. So I packed my gear and I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down the reserve and get some shots first thing. Well, I woke up and there was about this much snow on the window ledge. Brilliant. Headed off down to the reserve, and I pretty much had it completely to myself. And there are times with photography when it's really nice to just get lost in the process. And I'm just wandering around, deciding on what it is I want to show, what I want to compose, and just enjoying the process of taking pictures, not worrying about, you know, is this going to be good enough? Is a judge going to like it or whatever? Just enjoying the process of capturing a scene and working through it and stuff like that. And it was very relaxing. And you know, the sun still hasn't come up because it's still really bright because there's so much snow in the sky. And I'm wandering around and I'm taking pictures, and it gets to the stage where I'm going to be late for work. And I've checked this and I think I'm right. I think I'm right in saying that in the UK, legally, if it snows, you can be late for work. I think that's the law as we understand it in this country. And so I thought, well, I'll be a bit late for work. I'll carry on taking photos. I'm having so much fun just wandering about, and I've got the place to myself. And it gets to the point where I go from being late for work to being really, really rather late for work. So I decided to head off towards the station because I got all my gear, and the idea was I was going to go into work and at lunchtime pop out and take some shots, hopefully in the city. So I headed off down through this column of trees, and I got to Loughton Station. And as I walked into the foyer, on the board, there were 3 of the most magical words I have ever seen. Central line closed.
Hey.
Brilliant. I don't have to go to work. Yeah. So I turn around and I start heading my way back up through Loughton. And as I make my way up, I get home, and so I haven't got the day off because we've got a system at work where I can remote control the computer in the office and you know, do my work from home. That's not a problem. So I fire up my laptop, try to connect to work, and it disconnects. Well, that's strange. It normally works first time. Try to connect again, and it disconnects. In the end, I tried 12 times before I finally get on to work. And no sooner do I get on than a dialog box comes up. System overloaded. If your job is not essential, log off now. Well, luckily, my job is about as essential as an ashtray on a motorbike. So this means that not only is it snowing, but I've got the whole day to take pictures and I'm being paid for it. Life simply doesn't get better than this. So I grabbed some breakfast, and then I decided to head off. And this time, instead of going out my road and turning right, I step out and turn left, and I walk up towards Epping Forest. And it soon turns out that everybody else is walking up towards Epping Forest because nobody can go to work. And they're all heading the same way, and it's up the biggest hill we've got. And they're all going to go tobogganing, and they all throw themselves down this hill on all manner of contraptions. Everybody was having fun. At one point, I saw 4 guys standing up, sliding down the hill on the bonnet of a Ford Anglia. I actually haven't got a photo of it because I was giggling too much, to be honest. But, you know, it was just a lovely day. Everybody was throwing themselves down. People would ask me who I was taking photos for, and I would just give them a different magazine each time, you know, and it didn't matter. I was just, you know, enjoying seeing people and trying to capture people's images. And like I say, everybody was having fun, possibly with the exception of this girl in the front here. I'm not sure she was completely enjoying it as much as everybody else. But, everybody was having a great time, including me. And, I think they should do this more often. These people would be wasting their time at work. This is a much better use for their time. Anyway, eventually I decided to make my way through the forest to somewhere else. And so I've lived in Epping Forest all my life. I've walked in the forest, I've mountain biked in the forest pretty much all my life. And I used to be of the opinion that if you dropped me anywhere, I would know my way out. Trouble is, I had to change my opinion that day because I discovered I don't really know the forest. What I know is where all the tracks are and where all the roads are. And if the roads are closed because they're covered in snow, so you can't hear them, and the tracks are just covered in snow, so basically all you've got is a series of snow with trees in it, and it all looks exactly the same. And at one point I found myself walking around thinking to myself, now I'm pretty sure there's 3 streams meet at this point, but I couldn't find one of them until I fell in it. Eventually I made my way over to this area here, which is called the stubbles. Specifically this lovely group of trees. I called this one Walkies. And then behind the stubbles, we get Strawberry Hill Pond, which is a lovely, lovely pond with a lovely reflection. I just spent a lot of time shooting the reflections and the snow and just having a great time. And that was probably one of the best days photography I will ever have. And that was right on my doorstep, all within walking distance. Just an absolutely lovely time. So, as I said, we started one end of Loughton. We now moved to the other end of Loughton, and we're now in Epping Forest, slowly spiralling out. This is Strawberry Hill Ponds. I don't want you getting the idea that the ponds of Epping Forest are this beautiful blue colour. The only way you can get this beautiful blue colour is to get up first thing in the morning on a completely still day and get the sun, get the sky reflected in the water. And then if you take this shot, I took this shot and half a dozen others, and the next thing I know, somebody's Labrador jumped in the water and it went back to its normal mucky brown colour. Fungi are a regular subject in the forest around about October, November time. Very, very weather dependent. One week there can be none, next week you can't move for them. All depends on the weather. These, by the way, for those who aren't familiar, these are puffballs, and that stuff over the top of them, the puffball's actually puffing. This is called a drop in the forest. And after much, much thought, I decided the best title for this would be Feather in a Field.
Fantastic.
A lot of thinking goes into this, it's not just thrown together. So this is Temple Field, which is part of the Worley's estate, which is part of Epping Forest. Was a big house, and it had this garden, had these grounds, and somebody decided to put this temple on a hill to make it look a bit better. And this has been a muse of mine, somewhere I visit from time to time, just trying different approaches to it. Never really got a picture I'm completely 100% happy with. Doesn't mean to say they haven't been used. This one's been used in, there's a book of short walks in Epping Forest. This is inside that. But like I say, I've never really found one that I've been completely happy with, mainly because there's some power lines running across the field and they're right where I want to put my tripod so I can get the temple with Canary Wharf and the rest of London in the background. So yeah, this one's called Tree and Temple. And in order to get this shot, you park for Temple Field. You park up on a hill up here on the right-hand side, and then you sort of walk down and walk back up to the temple. And this particular evening, I walked up to the temple, and I got there, and suddenly around the temple, either side, came a herd of cows. And I thought, well, that's not the shot I want, is it? Really not the shot I want. I know what, I'll go somewhere else. So I turn around and I start to walk away from the cows over to the other side of the field. And as I walk away, I've taken a few steps, and then this rumbling starts behind me. And I suddenly turn, and all the cows are a lot closer than they were before. I thought, that's strange. That's really, really strange. Nah, it'd be fine. It's cows. Don't hurt anybody, do they, cows? Nah, it'd be fine. So again, I turn and I take about 3 steps, and the rumbling starts again, and I turn and I yell, stop! And screeching to a halt, just about there is a cow. So what do? I know nothing about cows, absolutely nothing. But I think to myself, don't show fear. Don't break eye contact. So I found myself there, standing there, staring into the eyes of this cow. And they've got big eyes. And this goes on and on. And around about this point, it now occurs to me I am in a staring competition with a ton of Aberdeen Angus. Yeah. So I'm standing there, and it's looking at me, and I'm looking at it, and we don't break. Well, this goes on for, it felt like, for about 20 minutes. It was just standing there. And I dare not move because it's going to steamroll me as soon as I standing there. Well, eventually, and I mean eventually, from the back of the herd comes a mooing. And the mooing is like Frisian for leave him, Terry, and worth it. Because with that, the cow just backs up a little bit. So if you ever want to get this picture, what you have to do is you have to park on this hill up here, and then you walk down to the middle and then back up to this hill. And then when you get to the temple, what you do is you walk down the hill backwards very, very, very slowly until you bump into the hedge, and then you shuffle along the hedge till you find the gate. Then you climb over the gate and you make sure the gate is very, very locked, and then you can take that photo. So heather is something we get. Never used to get as much heather in the field forest as we do now. Seems to be managed differently now, and you just get these occasional bursts of this lovely purple colour. But one thing you do get quite a lot of is deer, and in fact, pretty much every time I take the dog for a walk in the forest, I see deer, and so much so, even in lockdown, you could actually find them laying in the middle of the roads. First thing in the morning. For some reason they liked the tarmac, it was warm or something. But yeah, but it never stops being exciting. Every time I see them, I just love seeing them. They're so pretty to see, you know, I just spot them through the trees. This next shot is called In Kate's Cellar, for no other reason that there's an area of the forest called Kate's Cellar, and that's where I took the picture. This, somewhat less interestingly, if it ever appears, yeah, thank you, is called Autumn in Epping Forest. Now this is an area that just to the left of this shot is a wide track, and when I used to mountain bike, this wide track used to drop down really steeply and then climb back up really steeply. And so if you're riding it, ideally you want to throw yourself as fast as possible down the hill, so as it makes it easy to get up the top. Anyway, one day I was hurtling down that hill and I looked to my left, and in amongst these ferns, I saw 2 blokes, one dressing the other one up as an angel. Now, I'm not sure what I expected to see, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't 2 blokes, one dressing the other one up as an angel. So a little tip for you. If you find yourself on a mountain bike going downhill and you see 2 blokes, one dressing the other one up as an angel, you will crash horribly into the ditch at the bottom and it hurts. So ferns are a subject in the forest that I regularly visit, just trying different ways to light them, or maybe I don't know, let's try an unusual compositional technique. And this one's called the rule of thirds. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but let's try putting something on the rule of thirds. Just keep the judges happy. But also you can try different ways of processing them, you know, something simple. So, you know, why not try to make it look a bit different, or just try different ways of lighting them. Pick up, you know, block various bits of light, bits of sunlight to just highlight them exactly how they are. Now, quick pop quiz for you. See if anybody gets this. Right, this is native of Epping Forest. You press your space bars and shout out if you know what it is, or guess what it is. Anybody want to guess what it is? Anybody? Come on, somebody. Nobody? No?
All right. No.
No. Well, it is a burnt out mini metro in one of the car parks.
Well, of course it would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well,
How silly of me.
to be fair, you're lucky it wasn't a body. This is also a burnt out mini metro, and of course, for a bit of variety, let's go fall back on the good old burnt out transit van, because that always looks so attractive. Thing about Epping Forest is all the ponds in Epping Forest are man-made. And to my way of thinking, the man who made them wasn't much of a photographer, because they always seem to be in the wrong place. So I end up usually grabbing a wide-angle lens and getting close to a puddle for something like this. But occasionally I'll get some shots from the ponds themselves, especially when it's frozen and there's not many people about. Gives you a chance to get the place to yourself. Sort of winter time, November, December, January. It's kind of my favorite time in the forest, when you get this bright sunlight and there's no foliage to break it up, because you get these lovely stripes of light. And especially here, so there are two Iron Age hill forts in Epping Forest. This is Loughton Camp, and the other one is Amesbury Banks. And you see that the sun sort of drapes itself over the ramparts of the hill forts. I just love the way that works. And that's the thing about photographing somewhere. You kind of start to learn about the history and learning about more about it, and you wonder what that thing is and why there's a lump there. This one's called Lockdown Light. This was beginning of lockdown. We were getting out really early to avoid the huge crowds of people doing their 1 hour of exercise in Epping Forest. So it was nice to catch the very first rays of light as they warmed up the trees. And one of the things that you sort of discover is that our experience of the forest is completely different to that of our forefathers. So about 180 years ago, they stopped lopping, which is where you can see the tops of the trees. They used to just chop the tops of the trees off and use them as for wood, basically, for building or for fire. And so this stopped back then. So you can see that the amount of the tree that's grown in the last 100 odd years. And so if you actually see pictures of Epping Forest in Victorian times, it looks completely different, because it's loads of little tiny stumpy trees, sort of 10-foot high stumpy trees with the occasional oak tree, and everything else is completely different. It's amazing the difference that in just straight photos you can see from now and then of how much the trees have grown up when they've been left to just grow on their own. Tried the odd abstract photo in the forest. This is a lake, and this one, next shot, is terrible wildlife photo, but I just love I love the patterns in the water. This one's called Heart in Brown. And after much thought, I decided the best title for this would be Leaves on a Log. This one's called Hanging by a Moment. And here's the same idea 6 months later in a frozen puddle. This one's called Thorny Wire. And I put this into competition at Harlow, and the judge said 99% of photographers in their right mind wouldn't take that shot. I don't know if I'm in the 1% or not. I don't really understand what that means at all.
Wonderful bit of reassurance.
So this, so one of the things, I took loads and loads of photos in the forest, and most of them were rubbish, and I could never work out why. And it wasn't until I got David Ward's book, and in it says forests are hard. Forests are hard because of the 3 C's, and the 3 C's are chaos, contrast, and complexity. And as photographers, we can deal with one of them easy enough. 2 is hard, but 3 is next to impossible. And in forests, you get all 3. So in this case, this gives you an idea. So the lighting isolates this single tree and leaves those other trees separated. You can imagine if the lighting wasn't like that, it would all flatten down and you just end up with loads and loads and loads of different lines across there. And it would just be too chaotic for the viewer to know what it is you want to see. So that's why foggy, misty days, get into a forest, you'll get this recession, you'll get this depth that will give you a chance to get some shots that allow you to conjure up the vision of the forest. Now for something completely different. So pretty much the only sport I'm a fan of is the Tour de France. And so I couldn't believe it when I checked the itinerary for this year, and it turns out that the Tour de France is going through my town. I mean, there are towns in France it's never been to, and it turns out it's going through my town. So I got up there early because I thought there might be me and 1 or 2 other cycling fans. Turned out there were thousands and thousands of people that day. Lovely day. Everybody had such great fun because the peloton waxed through in about 12 minutes the whole time, but still everybody was having a great time and really enjoying the spectacle. Next one. So I said I'd talk a bit about HDR. So for those don't know, HDR is high dynamic range photography. What that means is that you take a series of shots from really underexposed to really overexposed. Why would you do that? Well, because in a scene, our eyes can see much more than the cameras can. So, you know, in a scene where it's really bright and really dark, say a sunset where the land is really dark and the sky is really bright, you've got this big range, exposure range from dark to light. And the camera can only capture about this much of it. So what we do with HDR is we take a series of shots to take the whole range. And then you've got a choice. You can mash them together in software, and then you can choose whether what it's going to look like. And you can make it look like a cartoon, you can make it look like something from another planet. Or what I aim to do is to make it look as close as I possibly can to what I saw with my own eyes. And why would you do this? Well, this is where I started. So this picture, this is on Temple Field again. And when you take a shot like this, it's really easy to turn the tree into a silhouette. And I wanted to maintain some detail in there. But if you try and do that, you'll either end up with a dark black tree or a white sky. And traditionally we do that by putting a graduated filter over the top of the camera to darken the top of the screen and to bring the exposure range into something the camera can capture. But last time I looked at the Lee filter catalog, they don't have a one filter that's this shape. Yeah, they don't have that shape in there. So I tried using HDR in order to keep this line of dark in my shot, which is what I wanted. And since then, I've used HDR from time to time, especially in the forest. Particularly black and white kind of works well in HDR because it's an effect anyway. So, you know, you can push the contrast in whatever direction you particularly choose. But the main reason I would use HDR in the forest is for one of the 3 C's, and that's the contrast one. Because the range of contrast from really dark to really bright up in the sun here and to down underneath the trees, such a deep, large range of exposure that's really difficult to capture correctly. And using HDR allows me to capture what I see with my own eyes, because quite often that's pretty much all I'm aiming for with my pictures. I'm aiming for it to look how I saw it. I'm not aiming to recreate stuff in the computer and do something weird and wonderful, just trying to make it look how I saw and how I experienced that particular day.
Chris, I'll
Yeah,
ask a quick question.
you can do.
Way back, you showed what you called a grab shot.
Yes.
You did that with HDR. I'm assuming as it was a grab shot, you haven't got a tripod. So did you do that handheld?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll talk about that in the second half. Let me talk you through that, and I've got an example of that in the second half. So, and kind of with HDR, I'm always aiming for it to try to be as realistic as I possibly can, because with a shot like this one, it'd be easy to try and desperately grab every piece of information from this part here where the sun is. But I'm happy to let it burn out because the sun is really bright and you shouldn't look at it with your eyes, and it's too bright. So why wouldn't it burn a camera lens out? I'm just looking for something that looks like what I saw with my own eyes. And here we have this shot, which is an arch in the forest, and this was used by Epping Forest magazine for their front cover a couple of years back now. And that, I make time for a little break.
Thank you, Chris. You got any questions now whilst everyone is sitting here and the recording is still going on?
Yes, please. Can you just give us the name of that book you mentioned by David Ward?
No. I know it's a book by David Ward, and I lent it to somebody and I never got it back.
Oh.
But to be honest, I think that was probably the most useful thing in it. I don't want to slag David off, but it tended more to be a shot with lots of rambling text around it, and that was about the only time I found anything that I really got out of it. But it's one of David Ward's books, so I don't know how many he's made, but buy all of them. He needs some money.
Well, I'm counting about 5 on Amazon at the moment, so it's choosing which one.
I don't know. I would love to help you. I'm sorry, but it was a few years ago, and I had no idea what's happened to it.
Okay, Chris, how long is your second half? It's a question I need to ask.
Well, should we have a marvelous? Right. Okay. So in the second half, I said we're going to spiral out from my house, and it's going to speed up in the second half because we've really not gone very far from my house at all. But to start off with, we're not even going to leave my house. Come on, thank you. This shot was taken from my back garden. I haven't got a massive back garden, but we back onto a school, and the school, it's a primary and a junior school, and between the two is this big thick hedge, and living in this hedge is a family of foxes. And when lockdown happened last year, we suddenly noticed these foxes walking about in the middle of the day, like midday to 1 o'clock. And it was because they'd basically been living pretty much off the food kids dropped and off takeaways that people had left in the street and rubbish like that. And of course, with lockdown, there just was none of that for them. And so they were really starved, really ill. So we started feeding them to tide them over. In fact, we still feed them, to be honest. So this is one of the fox kits. He's not looking at me, he's actually looking at his mum. His mum's just collecting food for them. This apple tree, this was another great idea the school had. They decided to plant apple trees for, I assume, so the kids can learn where apples come from. The only trouble is that the apples always ripen when the kids are on holiday, so they all end up on the floor, which was not the brightest idea anybody had had. So this is the green outside my house. And for this next shot, I went to the exotic heights of Loughton Station flower bed, as I did for this one. And for this, I went to Loughton swimming pool. So this is my second favourite tree. And there's a couple of reasons why it's a favourite tree. One is that at certain times of the year, you get some lovely sunsets behind it. And it's always nice to have a beautiful sunset behind a tree. But the other main reason I really like it is because it's right next to a lay-by. Because I don't know about anybody else's experience, but normally the time you see the best composition with the best lighting is usually when you're in the fast lane of the M6 or something, and there's nowhere to park, and you end up driving around for ages trying to find a shot that you've now missed. So it's nice to have somewhere. I mean, this is not very far from my house at all, and I can look out the windows down the valley and see the light's going to be good. I can drive out, park up, wander into this field and get the shot. Over the years, this has got slightly more difficult to get. When I first turned up to take a picture of this tree, there was just a gap and you just walked on the field. After a couple of years, a wire appeared across the gap and you had to do like the photographer's limbo to get under there, to get into the field. And then more recently, they put a big metal gate in the way. But I noticed to the right of the big metal gate was a photographer's size gap. So they obviously still wanted me to go and take pictures of their trees. So I thought that was okay. This next shot is called X Marks the Spot. And it's kind of one of the things I like about living where I do is that you can, you only have to go to the edge of the town and suddenly you're in a completely rural environment. You know, there's tractors working, cutting hay fields. But at the same time, you know, I can walk down the road and get on a train into central London anytime I like. So it works quite well from that point of view. If anybody remembers the ITV BBC programme Birds of a Feather, yeah. And they were always talking about Chigwell Village. Well, it's just about there, yeah. And it is far more snobby than they make out in the programme. So this is my third favourite tree, and unfortunately you can't get to this at all anymore, which is a bit of a shame. I kind of like it's kind of tricky to take this shot because you've got the M11 motorway in the background, so you kind of have to do a long exposure in order to blur the traffic out. But having said that, you know, it's still got a lovely shape to it. And sometimes when you take a picture, you're never quite sure if it works in black and white, or maybe it should work in colour. So what do we think, people? Black and white?
Black and white, yeah.
Black and white.
Colour?
Yeah, black and white.
Shouts for colour? Anybody?
Colour.
It's funny. It's funny. When you do this, when I can see all your hands, there's never a consensus. You go to one club, it's black and white, all black and white. Next one, it's all colour. But naming wise, I decided to call this one Death in Black. And I decided to call this one Light After Death. I was having a really cheerful day, wasn't I? When it came to naming them. So further along the same road, we get to Passingford Bridge, Stapleford Mill. And this mill has become kind of another muse of mine that I visit from time to time. And in fact, I can date my pictures of it by how many windows are boarded up on the mill itself, until you get to the more recent ones, where not only are all the windows boarded up, but the planks are starting to fall off it. And it occurs to me that I may end up documenting this whole building collapsing and falling apart. I mean, it is a listed structure, but nobody wants to take it on because it floods there so often. And, you know, there's a farm next to it that has sort of pretty much been abandoned because it ends up under 2 foot of water at the drop of a hat. But this is the mill race next to the mill itself. And this is the river further upstream when it's broken its banks. I decided to call this one Depth of Field. Come on, it's a photographer's jug. If you guys don't get it, it's wasted. It's wasted.
Yeah, that's right. That's fine.
So between Loughton and Thaden Boys, which is the next village in that direction, there's this field, and it's next to a cottage, and the cottage is called Boundary Cottage. So I've decided this is called Boundary Field, and I lay claim to this location. And this one sort of tree on the hill has become sort of a study, something I can visit very easily. It's about a 6-minute drive, if that, for me. And I can get there and take shots and try different ideas out with it, you know, try different approaches to that single tree, different ways of processing. Just play with ideas. You know, I can go out there, I can take shots, loads of shots of this tree, throw them away if I don't like them. And more recently, I've even tried walking up to the top of the hill and shooting backwards and seeing what happens there when I shoot that way and see what I get. So we're going towards Thaden Boys. And there are locations that non-photographers, muggles, if you like, non-photographers will tell you, go there and take photos. It's pretty, really pretty. And Thaden Boys Village Green is one of those places that's like that. They'll tell you, oh, it's really pretty. And it is kind of really pretty, but photographically, it's a nightmare. There's so many parked cars, so much junk. I mean, it's got an avenue of trees down the middle. It's got the, you know, cricket pitch. It's a classic British village green, but it's really hard to get a nice photo of it. So I thought I'd try there one evening. And when I was doing this was back when I shot with Canon cameras, and I was using a bit of software called Magic Lantern. And if you've got a Canon camera, it's always worth having a look at Magic Lantern, because what it does is you download the software from the internet, put it onto a card, put it into your camera. When you restart your camera, suddenly you have a whole series of new facilities that you didn't have before. So I was using this was on my 5D Mark II, which only used to bracket 3 shots. And I was using this to bracket 9 shots. See what it does. And it's quite good, but little tip for you, if you ever do try to use this, make sure you've got a copy of the manual with you. Because this particular evening was the first time I used Magic Lantern, and I was there, click, 9 shots, great, click, 9 shots, great, click. Then I thought I'll go back to doing it the traditional way with grads. And I realized I didn't know how to switch it off. I spent ages. Yeah. If you'd have been there, you'd have seen me ejecting cards, reformatting cards, pulling batteries out, and eventually I managed to get back to how it was. If I'd have had the manual, I'd have realized it was just one single button press, but there you go. Live and learn, don't you? Having said you can't trust muggles when it comes to location, this is a location my mum found. This is a place called Great Wood, which is on the way to the mill, as you just saw. And during the year, it's really dull, uninteresting woodland. Nothing particularly going for it. It's no particularly old trees, no real atmosphere with it. But around about May time, it suddenly burst into being an absolute sea of bluebells. It's so pretty there, especially when they've got the rapeseed behind. So you get the bluebells and the yellow rapeseed behind. So, you know, just because you've visited a location once in the winter, try again in the summer or the spring or the autumn. You know, places change. They can have their right moment, their right weather condition, their right season. This is Bumbles Green on the way to Harlow. And then you go through there and you get to this place here. This is called Aythorpe Roding. And this mill is privately owned. And I kind of like the idea of that, because I think that's really, really kind of somebody to look after and maintain that mill, just so as photographers have something to take pictures of. I think that's really kind of them. So we were talking about HDR earlier, and talking about whether we shoot handheld or stuff with it. So one of the reasons I shoot from time to time shoot HDR is that photography is not a spectator sport. Yeah, so you go for a walk with the family and you head off down the road and you see a scene and you think, that looks pretty, I want to get a shot of that. So you stop, get your tripod out, set your tripod up, put your camera on the tripod, get your composition right, then put some graduated filters on the front, and then you wait for the light to be right. and you get the shot you want. By which time you turn around and the whole of your family is standing behind you going, come on, we got somewhere to go. So it's really not practical to grab shots with the rest of the family. So instead, what I will do is I will just take a series of bracketed shots handheld. And that's what this is. And as long as each individual shot is shot, then the software will sort it out. It will line it up for you. And you don't, I mean, the books will say you need to do it on a tripod, and yeah, maybe you do for the best quality, but actually you can easily get away with just bracket shooting all the time when you're walking about. I mean, worst case, you've got, well, I mean, you shoot with Olympus now and I get 5 exposures. Worst case, I've got 5 exposures, 4 of which I don't want. I just throw 4 away. Best case, I use all 5 of them as an HDR. Depends on what the exposure range is and what I need. You know, it doesn't cost me anything to throw images away, so it doesn't matter. And so this one is called Woodman's Rest. And that, by the way, is not a ghost. That's the smoke coming off his fire. And you can look at this. This is HDR. You can say, you're welcome to say, oh, you think it's overcooked, artificial looking, whatever you like. That's your opinion. But all I can say is it was better than any of the single exposures out of that shot. And I came away with something I liked. So, you know, why not try it? Why not give it a go? So moving further afield now, so that was Hatfield Forest, which is right near Stansted Airport. Also near Stansted Airport, along the same road, there's this village called Thaxted, a proper Essex countryside village with mill and church. And if you get there, you park up like I did, and you walk along the side of the field, and then I walk back in along the tractor lines like that. Because I'm always keen to do that. If I'm working somebody else's field, I'll always walk down the tractor lines. I came back here about 3 years later, and round by the mill and the church, I followed where somebody had trampled down the crops. And they not only trampled down the crops, they then trampled down the area the size of a tripod. And when you stood where the tripod would be, you could see that it was going for exactly the right alignment of the church and the windmill. And I'm pretty sure that a photographer did it. And I really don't think we should be doing that. Not to just, you know, get a shot and for the judge to tell you it's rubbish. You know, you shouldn't be destroying somebody else's crops. And so, you know, I think we should be following the old Scout motto, which is, you know, take only photos, leave only footprints. It's not worth destroying somebody else's crops for a few photos. Anyway, ran over. Anyway, I'll get there this particular evening and I'm there. And I've set the camera up and the tripod up and I'm waiting for the light to be right. And because this is near Stansted, every minute you get a plane flying through here like that, which adds a sort of video game element to your photography because you want to try and avoid getting the plane in the shot, so you're banging away. Anyway, I've been, like I say, I've been there about 20, 25 minutes. When just about there, 2 people stand up.
Okay.
Put their clothes back on and then walk off this way. See, I don't care what they say. Sometimes a wide angle lens is the wrong lens for landscape photography. And here's another view of the mill, this time trying to get the clouds to sort of wisp around the outside of it. So one of the things I kind of discovered through photography was that Essex has a coast. It never really occurred to me that Essex had a coast because living where I live, as far away from the coast as you can kind of possibly get and still be in Essex. But it turns out Essex got the 2nd longest coastline in the country. And so there's a lot of photographic interest there. So as I started to discover this, where did I go first? Well, the first place I went was Leigh-on-Sea. And this is the beach at Leigh-on-Sea up close. And the beach is just made from piles and piles of discarded cockle shells. And why do they do that? Well, if you actually look at Leigh itself, is basically it's this much mud. Yeah, there's a lot of mud there. And in order to get to the boats, what's happened is that the cockle fishermen have dumped piles and piles of shells out to create these little banks that you can get out to the boats on. Anyway, one particular morning, I was there with my friend Clive, and we were on one of these banks of shells, and he was behind me and to my right, taking a shot similar to this, but frankly nowhere near as good. Anyway, he was behind me taking this shot, and next thing I know, I hear this scream of, "Quick, grab me camera." And I turn around, and what's happened is Clive has taken a step backwards off the shells and into the mud, and he's stuck, completely stuck solid. So I take his camera off, his camera gear off him, and my camera gear, put that up the side, and I come back. And then we have the discussion about how we're going to get him out of this mud. And he really wasn't keen on my idea, which was to wait until the tide come in and then let him fall off. He didn't think that would work. So I went back and got myself a tripod to lean on, and I edged to the edge of these shells because I couldn't tread any further than that, because if I trod on the mud, we'd both be stuck and we'd be a right pair of wallies having to call out the RNLI to dig us out. So anyway, I grab hold of Clive, I grab him by the collar, and he comes out with a pop, leaving just his welly behind. And so my enduring memory of Leon C is of Clive hopping around on one leg with his welly stuck in the mud, saying, "Get me welly, mate, get me welly." Well, I retrieved that one for him as well. So yeah, that's the thing with Leon C. It's quite strange because the tide there goes out really, really fast. So much so I quite often have turned up and thought, "Oh, I must have misread the tide timetable," because I'll be looking at it and the tide's in, and then I'll get my stuff out the back of the car, walk down to the side, and the tide's gone. And literally it goes like somebody's pulled the plug out. It just goes straight down and really, really quick. So this boat here, the bigger green one, if you go back in 1940, the Allied Expeditionary Force was stuck on the beaches of Dunkirk, and the call went out famously for the little ships to rescue them. And this call was answered by the cockle fishing families of Leon C. And they headed off across the channel and rescued some boys off the beaches and headed their way back. Not all of them made it back. It's believed half of them were lost by hitting a mine in the middle of the channel, but nobody really knows what happened to them. But this boat, the Endeavour, actually did make its way all the way back, and it's since been restored and is a sail training ship. And if you ever watch the recent or the more recent Dunkirk film,
Yeah.
In that film they have the little ships, and when they film the little ships they actually use the real little ships, and so you'll see the Endeavour in there amongst those ships. And so what you're looking at there is a film star. So this is Leon C. Basically boats and mud, really, not much else to take pictures of. So my old Canon 20D used to have this thing where certain times the white balance would go completely off the scale. And this is what I did this time. I took this shot into the light, and the white balance just went straight into the yellow end of the spectrum. And I kind of liked it. I liked the way it looked. I liked the look of it. So this is called Lee Gold. You know, you can have happy accidents. Not every shot has to be technically perfect. Talking of not technically perfect, what do we reckon? HDR or straight shot? Anybody?
HDR.
Straight shot.
It is, in fact, yes, a straight shot. You don't need HDR to make things look rubbish. You really don't. You can just use your camera if you want This one's called Sailing the Sea of Mud. So if you go back from Leigh-on-Sea past the cockle sheds, there's a long winding road, goes across the mud flats, then over a bridge, and then onto a place called Two Tree Island. And at the end of Two Tree Island, the road just carries on into the sea. And this is it here. It just carries on into the sea there. This place called Hadley Ray. And the nice thing about this is if you step off to the left of the road, you will sink into the mud. If you step off to the right, you won't sink anywhere near as much. So you can actually walk out onto the mud flats and get this sort of shot. You have to be careful if you're doing a long exposure. You have to keep moving your feet about, otherwise you will get stuck. So you end up sort of doing a long little dance, but still, you know, you can actually walk out on there. See this thing here? This is what it looks like when the tide comes in. I decided to call this one TTTL. Now the judge didn't get it either. I don't know why I bother. I really don't.
We got it. We got it.
Some of you got it, yeah. This is called Sunrise over Southend. So, like I said, as you go between Leigh-on-Sea and onto Two Tree Island, as you go over the bridge, you look to your left and you will see a scene something like this. And if you're anything like me, you'll slam your car into the parking bay on the side of the road, run back, set your camera up and take the shot. Job's a good one. 6 months later, I went back and I was working on the bridge, taking a shot, a sort of similar kind of scene. And I'm working away and I've got on the front of the camera, I've got a Lee filter holder and 3 Lee ND grads on the front. And while I'm working away, I didn't notice that I've lowered the camera until the front of the camera is over the handrail of the bridge. And when I move the camera, the Lee filter holder and all the grads disappeared off the side of, well, anyway. Luckily that day I wasn't in the middle of the bridge, I was over one side and the tide was out. So I managed to make my way down there, stuck my hand in this mud and pulled out this block of mud. And when I washed it off, it kind of all still works. But it's quite strange. So very recently I had, in fact, last week, the week before, I got a camera back from Olympus servicing and it came back and it was black, which was a shock because I forget what color cameras actually are. Because all of mine are sort of like coated in a light coating of Thames mud, so they're sort of this grey colour. So when they come back clean, it's always a bit of a shock. Oh, by the way, I'm not saying that I damaged the camera a lot, but they replaced the top, the front, the bottom, the back, the left side, the right side, the shutter. So,
Irishman's camera.
No wonder it looked different.
I was quite, and the best bit about it was it still worked fine. So between Leigh-on-Sea and Southend is Chalkwell. And Chalkwell may be famous for a lot of things, but for me it's famous for 2 things. One is the sheer number of sewage outflow pipes that there seem to be there. This is one, and this is another one. And the other thing it's famous for is the Crowstone. This is the Crowstone. There are 2 of these, one either side of the Thames, and they mark the start of the Port of London Authority. And so if you want to get a shot like this, when the tide's in, or tide's out, you can just walk out to it. But when the tide's in and you want to get a shot like this being Chalkwell, the only place you can really stand is, of course, on a sewage outflow pipe. And this one is called The Only Way Is Up. So moving to the other side of Southend Pier, you get to my favourite location, which is probably Thorpe Bay. So Thorpe Bay's, I kind of really like Thorpe Bay. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that the sand or mud is solid. You can walk about on it. You might occasionally sink into a bait digger's hole, but other than that, you're pretty much good to walk around on it. And the other thing is that in the winter, you get these beautiful sunrises. And it's really easy to work with because you get so much light reflected off the wet sand. that normally something like this should be sticking 2-3 graduated filters in the front of your camera. This, I think I managed to get away with 1.6 to just hold the whole exposure together. This next shot, it looks like I've gone into Lightroom and seen how far I can push the sliders to the right. It's not, it's pretty close to what I saw with my own eye. Why? Well, because it was taken an hour and a quarter before sunrise. Sometimes well before sunrise, on a really cold day, you get the most amazing light down there. This is called Inspiration Found. And to prove we get there at all times of the year, this is some frost on the beach in front of the beach huts. This one's called Des Res. And it's quite funny because in the East Anglian Federation, I've seen about 10 pictures of this one beach hut. And why this one? Because all the rest are really nicely kept, you know, all nicely painted and everything, but this one's dilapidated. So this is the one the photographers gravitate to, because we do like a bit of dereliction, don't we? This is called Light and Lock, and to me this is a real photographer's photo, because it's all about shadows and reflections and light temperature, and it's all about our raw material, and we should be out working always to get a better understanding of light, which is our raw material. So yeah, pretty much a friend of mine described this part of the talk as a tedious procession of boats on mud, so you've been warned. This one, I was trying here to get the clouds to line up with the power station on this side, on the other side in Kent. You can't do that anymore. You literally can't get that shot anymore because they've knocked the power station down. This shot was taken in January before lockdown, and I was working away while I was taking this, and one of the Lee filters slipped from my hand and went off to the left-hand side of this pier and slowly floated down through the sea, never to be seen again. I'm coming to the conclusion that Lee filters for me are kind of a consumable. Everybody else invests in them. I just kind of think, well, they'll last me about 4 months before I have some sort of accident with them, who knows. This one's called Snaking Ashore. Yeah, so this one, I put this in the competition at Harlow. So and H2, we mark out a 20.
Right, so do we.
Oh, good. You'll understand this then. You'll feel my pain in a sec. So the picture before this was an out of focus duck, right? And it was done by a beginner. And the judge said, you know, nice things about it, areas for improvement, and gave it a 12. Fair enough. This came up. The judge didn't really say anything particularly was wrong with it. Gave it a 7.
What?
Wow.
3.5 out of 10. You know when you're at the back of the hall and you just want to scream. Yeah, so
Sob.
I don't know what's particularly wrong with it, but then I'm not a judge because I can see.
We've had judges who are used to judging in a different federation who do things like 7 and then realise they should have doubled it and should have been 14. But even then, it was
Yeah.
I'd do better have his name so we don't invite him.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was only this and one other picture did he mark below 12. I don't know if we'd upset him or what. I don't know. I don't know if it was personal, but yeah, it was quite upsetting. So all the pictures you've seen so far were used in an article I did for Outdoor Photography magazine on Thorpe Bay. And I sent them all the pictures, and out of all of them, this was the one they chose. But it wasn't anywhere near my favourite photo, yeah, from the day, or from the set. But they liked it. So, and this happens to me a lot with competitions and things like that. I'll bung the ones I think are going to win in, and then I'll bung a few extra ones in that I'm not convinced are any good. And they're usually the ones that do pretty well. So yeah, don't listen to me when it comes to which pictures to use in your competition entries. But just my advice is always chuck a few wild cards in, because you never know what people will choose. This is called Thorpe Bay Lasso, Thorpe Bay 3, Dragging the Chains, and of course, Tired. So occasionally shoot HDR over there. Why would you shoot HDR particularly? Well, it's kind of, sometimes it's you get situations where it's really hard to grad for. Something like this, where the sun's sort of bang in the middle of the shot, really hard to get an exposure. And so, you know, I'll try with grads or I'll try with HDR, whichever works. And I don't care, you know, I don't care which one works. I'm not dogmatic. I don't shoot everything HDR. I don't shoot everything with grads. I shoot what works. Because, you know, you've got up at stupid o'clock in the morning. You've driven for an hour. You might as well get a shot that you actually like. And, you know, you can do different things like long exposures. And this was the last shot my 5D 5D Mark II ever took in anger, because it just suddenly stopped working after this. The shutter stopped working in cold speed, so in cold weather, so I'd kind of worn it out completely. Moving along from Southend to Thorpe Bay, you get to Shoebury-Ness. Kind of got a love-hate relationship with Shoebury-Ness. First time I turned up there were loads and loads of boats. Next time I turned up, there was one, this one, the Water Warrior. And ever since, there's never been any boats there at all. And so the first time, this time I went there, I took loads and loads of pictures of the Water Warrior. And yeah, so this one, pretty much every picture I came back from Shoebury-Ness with had this this color cast, because I said my on 20D, the white balance used to occasionally go wildly strange, and in this case it did, and every picture came out this muck brown color. And in this particular case, I kind of kept it because I kind of like the feel of it, the sort of painterly feel of it. I did this talk down at Southend once. They said, "Oh no, it's not your camera. Shoebury is that color." So yeah, so what do you do if there's nothing much in the way of foreground interest? Maybe you grab a rock that's kicking about, a pebble in some sand, and just get the light flicking across the sand. Maybe a buoy, or just go completely minimal. So Shoebury's quite a long way from me now. It used to be a lot closer, and then they put average speed cameras all the way down the A127, and it got a lot further away. And so it's about an hour and a quarter drive for me sometimes. And I got there one morning, and I opened the back of my car, and I went to get my wellies out, and I realised I bought my wife's wellies instead of my own wellies. So I was limited to actually only being able to take pictures from the side. And so this is where I got this shot, which is an outflow pipe. This thing on the left-hand side here is a Cold War anti-submarine boom. It's about 20 foot high, and it goes out 1.5 miles into the Thames estuary. And it gives you a chance to get something strange, which is kind of like a fence on a beach, which is a pretty unusual kind of thing to see. Moving further along the Essex coast, we get to the Naze, as in walking on the Naze. The nice thing about the Naze, probably not if you live there, but for photographers, the nice thing about the Naze is it's eroding, and it erodes into these beds of clay. And in the right light, these beds of clay look a bit like rock. And as Essex photographers, we are starved of rock. So anything that looks a bit like rock is okay in my book. Other locations that you know, some locations you just never have any luck with. This is Mersey Island. I've been there loads and loads of times. Never really got a shot with. I've just never really got a shot. And I wouldn't say not one I was happy with, just never got one. Just got turned up too late, got stuck in traffic, wrong location, wrong light, wrong weather. And this is about the only picture I've got of it looking particularly tropical one day. Other times, this is Frinton. Drove up there, it looked miserable. I got there, thick overcast clouds before the sun's come up. Loads and loads of pictures on the beach, all terrible, no light at all. And then I noticed a crack in the sky as the sun started to burst through. And I waited for it, got this shot, half a dozen others, and then the rain came down. So sometimes, you know, even when the weather isn't in your favour, you can actually get a shot that's quite interesting. A location that a lot of landscape photographer friends of mine won't bother with is Malden. It's a very pretty little town, seaside town, but it's really hard to take shots of because you're stuck on the side of the, and it's only certain compositions you can do. I got down there, this is Heybridge Basin, I got down there one morning, had the place to myself, and I walked down onto this private jetty, no boats there, so nobody would mind. I turned to the left and then I got this shot. And then I turned to the right and I got this shot of sunrise over North A Island. And then that was pretty much it. As I walked back to the towards the harbour itself, suddenly the place burst into life. There were people moving about, and there hadn't been anybody there 10 minutes before, and suddenly loads of people. I couldn't work out what it was, and boats moving about. And it turns out it was pretty much the last weekend where in the winter when they were going to get a chance to get their boats in for the winter. So here we have a boat waiting to lock, and there's the lock keeper waiting for the first boat in. And my final location tonight is Tolsbury. Tolsbury, if you saw the ITV series Liar, that was a lot of that was filmed in Tolsbury on the mudflats there. She canoes out onto the mudflats. The thing about Tolsbury is the mud is even worse than Leigh-on-Sea. You literally are stuck on the paths. If you step off the paths, you just will sink. But the other thing about it is it's got a big blooming great red lightship. And when you see a big blooming great red lightship, it's almost impossible not to get it in all your shots. And so you end up doing daft things like getting the sun to shoot straight through the anchor holes. And so this is a shot of Tolsbury, and this one was used by BBC Countryfile magazine for their centre spread, all about Essex and the Essex coast. So that's it for tonight. What I want to leave you with is, you know, it's really easy to overlook the places that are local to you and want to be somewhere better, but take a look at them and try them in different weather conditions, different times of year, different times of day. You might find something that's really interesting there. You know, just try and make the best of what's on your doorstep. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Chris. Excellent stuff.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Thank you.
And any questions, anybody? That's right. I was about to say any questions, and it pops up on the screen.
Thank you, Brian.
That was great, Chris. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're still recording. Any questions from anybody?